So you've seen my last video explaining how to use the formula half AB sine C to find the area of a triangle. And now you'd like to know how to draw the trigonometric graphs. We'll watch this video and I'll explain. So first warning, this is going to sound pretty alien to you. But don't worry, you will get used to it with enough practice. So up to now, you've been using sine, cos and tan as if they're operations. But what will be new to you is that they're actually graphs. The same as x squared is a graph, x cubed is a graph, sin x, cos x and tan x is also a graph. And you're expected to sketch these graphs from memory in the exam. So let's start with sin x. Sin x is a wave. It goes from 0, 0 up to 91, then down to 180, 0, then down to 270 minus 1, then up to 360, 0. So there's a few tips in drawing this graph. Firstly, on the y-axis, the maximum and the minimum is always 1 and minus 1. Secondly, the wave always starts at 0, 0. This is for the sine curve. The way I remember it is there's a term in religion called original sin. So I remember that sine starts from the origin. And thirdly, one full wave is 360. And fourthly, our calculator can also help us out in understanding the graph. If you put in sine of 90, you're going to get 1. And this corresponds to this coordinate here. If I put sine of, say, 200, I'm going to get negative 0.342. And this corresponds to this coordinate here. The final thing you need to know is that this graph goes on forever. It repeats this pattern forever, up to minus infinity to positive infinity. So we could extend this curve like so. Okay, now for the cos graph. It's very, very similar to the sine graph, and that's probably why it's so tricky, because students get them confused. So try to remember the differences between the graphs. So the cos curves look something like this. The cos curve starts at 0, 1. So that's different to the sine curve, where the sine curve started at 0, 0. So this curve, the cos curve starts at 0, 1. It comes down to 90, 0. Then it continues down to 180 minus 1. Then it starts to come up at 270, 0, and then the final maximum is at 361. Again, you can see that the maximum and minimum on the y-axis is 1 and minus 1. So again, the cycle is 360. That is a whole wave. And again, our calculator will help us understand the curve. So if I put cos 60, I'll see that cos 60 is a half, and this corresponds to this point here. If I say cos of 360, for example, I'll get 1, and that corresponds to that last point there. Right, now the final trigonometric graph you need to know is the tan graph. I've saved it for the last, well, because it's the strangest. Basically, it doesn't follow the same wave as the sine and cos graph do. Instead, it looks like this. So the first thing you'll notice are these dotted lines, which I call the asymptotes. I know I pronounce it a bit funny, but hey, that's me. These asymptotes, it starts at 90 and then repeats every 180. So there'll be another one at 270 and another one at 450. And the same as if you go back in the x-axis, you'll have another asymptote at minus 90 and it'll repeat every 180 going back. So what are these asymptotes? These are lines that represent where the graph never actually meets. It approaches, but it never actually meets. So when you're drawing a graph, you need to make sure that your tan graph actually doesn't touch the asymptotes. It approaches it, but it never touches it. Once you draw the asymptotes, the rest of the tan graph is actually pretty simple. I start at 0, 0, and I draw my line up to the asymptote, never touching it, and then I draw my line down to the asymptote behind it, being minus 90, and never touch it. And the same goes for the next point. So in between 270 and 450, there's 360. I put my coordinate there, and then I start drawing it up, and I start drawing it down, never touching the asymptotes on either side. So what's different about the tan graph is it doesn't follow the wave pattern of the sine and cosine graph. It doesn't have the maximum and minimum of 1 and minus 1 on the y-axis, and it repeats every 180 instead of every 360. So just a final tip before this video ends, practice drawing these graphs. Just a quick sketch will do. The grade 9 questions, so the A star and the A star star questions, will ask you to transform or translate these graphs. That's not in this video, but it'll be in the section where we talk about transformations. This way it goes.